I watched the water snake across my basement floor like some kind of biblical plague, except this wasn't divine intervention, this was pure negligence, courtesy of the Maple Ridge Homeowners Association and their idiotic retaining wall. The wall they'd installed 3 months ago without consulting anyone, without proper permits, and apparently without a single competent engineer involved in the decision-making process. Now my entire basement looked like an indoor swimming pool, and I could see my daughter's baby photos floating past in their ruined frames. My name is Franklin Lancaster, and I've lived in this house in Greenville, South Carolina for 8 years. I'm a civil engineer by trade, which made this entire situation even more infuriating because I knew exactly how badly they'd screwed up. The retaining wall they'd built along the common area behind my property had been designed by someone who clearly got their degree from a cereal box. No drainage system, improper grading, and they'd actually directed all the water runoff straight toward my foundation. It was like they'd built a dam specifically to flood my house. I stood there in my work boots, water soaking through to my socks, and pulled out my phone. The time read 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. I'd come down to grab some files from my home office and instead found Atlantis. The water was already 4 inches deep and rising. I could hear it trickling through the walls, a sound that made my blood pressure spike with every drop. First things first, I needed to document everything. I started taking photos and videos, making sure to capture the waterline on the walls, the ruined furniture, my destroyed home office, and the boxes of Christmas decorations that were now just soggy cardboard and broken ornaments. Then, I waded through the water to the small basement window that faced the backyard. Through it, I could see their precious retaining wall, a monument to incompetence, with water pouring over it like a waterfall directly into the ground that sloped straight toward my foundation. I called my wife, Sarah, who was already at work. "Honey, the basement is flooded. That retaining wall finally did exactly what I said it would do." "Oh my God, how bad is it?" "Everything's ruined. I'm looking at thousands of dollars in damage, maybe tens of thousands. I need to call a water remediation company and our insurance, but I'm billing every single penny to the HOA. Franklin, you know how they are. Patricia will fight this tooth and nail." Patricia Hendricks, the HOA president and the most insufferable woman I'd ever had the misfortune of knowing. She was 53 years old, with a haircut that screamed, "I demand to speak to your manager," and an attitude that made dealing with the DMV feel pleasant. She'd been the one pushing for that retaining wall, insisting it would beautify the common areas and increase property values. I'd stood up at the meeting and explained exactly why their design was flawed, but she dismissed me with a wave of her manicured hand and said I was being unnecessarily negative. Well, Patricia was about to learn what negative really meant. I called ServPro first, then my insurance company, then I called my lawyer, Tom Chen, who'd helped me with my real estate transactions before. He was in court, but his paralegal said he'd call me back within the hour. The ServPro team arrived at 8:15 a.m., with their industrial pumps and dehumidifiers. The crew chief, a guy named Marcus with 20 years of experience written in the lines on his face, walked through the basement and let out a low whistle. "This is bad, man. You're looking at complete remediation, probably have to remove drywall, treat for mold, replace insulation, and that's just to dry it out. You've got furniture damage, personal property damage, possible foundation issues. This is easily a $50,000 job, maybe more." My stomach dropped, but I kept my voice steady. "The HOA's retaining wall caused this. Their construction directed all the water to my foundation." Marcus nodded. "Yeah, I can see that from here. You want my professional opinion documented? I can write up what caused this in my report." "Absolutely. Document everything." As his team started setting up pumps, I went outside to examine the retaining wall more closely. It was about 4 feet high, made of concrete blocks, and ran along the back of 3 properties, including mine. The problem was obvious to anyone with eyes and a basic understanding of physics. They'd built it without proper drainage, and the ground behind it had become saturated from the recent rains we'd been having. The water had nowhere to go except over the wall, and they'd graded the ground so it flowed directly toward the houses instead of away from them. I was taking measurements and more photos when I heard the voice that made my jaw clench. "Franklin, what is all this commotion? You can't have all these trucks parked on the street. It's against HOA regulations." I turned to see Patricia striding across my lawn like she owned it. She was wearing white capris and a pink polo shirt with the Maple Ridge HOA logo embroidered on it, because of course she was. Her blonde highlights caught the morning sun, and her face was already pinched with disapproval. "Patricia, my basement is flooded because of your retaining wall. These trucks are from the water remediation company trying to save my house. Our retaining wall is perfectly fine. If you have flooding, it's probably because you didn't maintain your gutters properly." I felt something snap inside me. "I'm a civil engineer, Patricia. I told you 3 months ago that your design was flawed. I explained in detail why it would cause drainage problems. You dismissed my concerns, and now my basement has 4 inches of water in it and $50,000 worth of damage." Her eyes narrowed. "You have no proof that the wall caused anything. And even if it did, which it didn't, you'd need to file a claim through proper channels. You can't just make accusations." "I have plenty of proof. I have photos, videos, and a professional remediation company documenting the cause. I also have the emails I sent the HOA board warning about this exact scenario. I have my notes from the meeting where I explained the drainage issues, and I have a lawyer who I'm meeting with today." "Are you threatening to sue the HOA?" Her voice went up an octave. "That's incredibly hostile and goes against the community spirit we're trying to build here." "You flooded my house, Patricia. This isn't about community spirit. This is about your negligence destroying my property. I did no such thing. The HOA board made a decision to improve the common areas, which we have every right to do. If you have drainage issues, that's your responsibility as a homeowner." A red haze descended over my vision. "Get off my property." "Excuse me. Get off my property right now, and don't come back unless you have a check for the damages." Patricia's face turned the color of a tomato. "You can't speak to me like that. I'm the HOA president. I don't care if you're the Queen of England. You're trespassing. Leave." She sputtered for a moment, then spun on her heel and marched away, already pulling out her phone. Probably calling an emergency board meeting to discuss my hostile behavior. Tom Chen called me back at 10:30. I was sitting in my kitchen watching the Serve Pro trucks through the window and listening to the industrial hum of the pumps. "Franklin, I heard your message. Tell me everything." I laid it all out for him. The retaining wall construction, my warnings that were ignored, the flooding, the damage, Patricia's dismissal of responsibility. He listened quietly, asking occasional questions. "Okay, here's where we stand legally," he said when I finished. "The HOA has a duty to maintain common areas in a way that doesn't damage individual properties. If their construction directly caused your flooding, they're liable. However, you need to be very careful about how you proceed. Don't do anything that could be construed as vandalism or destruction of HOA property, even if you think you're in the right. I'm not going to vandalize anything, Tom. I'm going to bill them for every penny of damage and repairs." "Good. Here's what we do. First, get a complete assessment of all damages from ServPro and any other contractors you need. Get a structural engineer to assess the foundation and document the cause of the flooding. Get everything in writing from experts. Second, send a formal demand letter to the HOA board with all documentation. Give them 30 days to respond. Third, file a claim with your insurance and let them know you'll be pursuing subrogation against the HOA. What if they refuse to pay? Then we sue. And honestly, based on what you're telling me, we have a very strong case, especially since you warned them in writing beforehand. That shows clear negligence." We talked for another 20 minutes about next steps, costs, and timelines. By the time I hung up, I felt more in control. I had a plan. Over the next 3 days, I got estimates from contractors. The water remediation alone was going to be $12,000. Drywall removal and replacement, $8,000. New flooring, $6,000. Electrical work to replace damaged outlets and wiring, $3,000. Furniture and personal property losses, $15,000. Structural engineering assessment, $2,000. And that was just the beginning. By the time I added everything up, including the cost of having to rent a storage unit for all the basement contents and the loss of use of my home office, The total came to $68,000. $68,000, because Patricia Hendricks couldn't admit she was wrong. I also hired a structural engineer named Dr. Rebecca Walsh to assess everything. She came out on Friday morning with sophisticated equipment to measure moisture levels, check the foundation, and evaluate the grading and drainage around my property. "This is textbook negligence," she said, shaking her head as she examined the retaining wall. "Whoever designed this either didn't know what they were doing or willfully ignored proper engineering standards. There's no weep holes for drainage, no gravel backfill, no perforated pipe system. They essentially created a dam that holds water until it overtops and flows toward your house, and the grading makes it worse. This is going to continue to be a problem with every heavy rain." "Can you document all of that in a report?" "Absolutely. I'll have something comprehensive for you by Wednesday. And just so you know, I'm happy to testify if this goes to court." That night, I sat down and drafted the demand letter with Tom's help. It was 5 pages long, meticulously detailed every instance of negligence, included photo documentation, referenced my prior warnings to the board, and demanded payment of $68,000 within 30 days. We sent it certified mail on Monday morning to every member of the HOA board, Patricia Hendricks, Donald Murray, and Carol Zhang. The response came faster than I expected. On Wednesday afternoon, I got a letter from the HOA's lawyer, some guy named Richard Beaumont from a firm in downtown Greenville. The letter was dismissive and condescending, claiming that the HOA had no liability for my damages, that I had failed to prove causation, and that any further legal threats would be considered harassment. I called Tom immediately. They lawyered up. "Expected. Send me the letter." I heard typing on his end. "Okay, here's what's going to happen. They're going to stonewall. Hope you give up. We're not going to give them that satisfaction. File the lawsuit. Let's make this official." "How long will it take?" "Could be 6 months to a year before we get to trial, but we can push for expedited discovery given the ongoing property damage. I'll also file for a temporary restraining order requiring them to fix the drainage issue while the case is pending. The last thing we want is more flooding." "Do it." We filed the lawsuit on Friday, April 18th. The complaint was 23 pages and included exhibits with all the documentation, photos, expert reports, and email chains. We sued for the $68,000 in damages, plus attorney fees, plus punitive damages for willful negligence. The lawsuit hit the neighborhood like a bomb. By Monday morning, I had 3 neighbors come to my door. The first was Jerry Rodriguez from 2 houses down. "Franklin, I heard about the lawsuit. I just want you to know I think you're completely right. That wall has caused drainage issues for my yard too. Not flooding, but my grass is dying because it's constantly waterlogged now." "Have you complained to the HOA?" "Multiple times. Patricia keeps saying I need to improve my soil quality." He rolled his eyes. "If your lawsuit goes anywhere, I might join in." The second neighbor was Linda Kowalski, whose property was also adjacent to the retaining wall. "Franklin, I got a letter from the HOA warning all homeowners not to participate in your frivolous litigation, or we could face our own legal consequences." "Can they do that?" "No, they absolutely cannot. That's intimidation, and it's probably illegal. Forward me that letter. My lawyer needs to see it." The third neighbor was Robert Chen, who lived across the street. "Hey man, just wanted to let you know Patricia is going around telling everyone you're trying to bankrupt the HOA and raise everyone's dues. She's painting you as the bad guy." "Of course she is." Robert hesitated. "For what it's worth, I was at that meeting when you warned about the wall. You were right then, and you're right now. Don't let her bully you into backing down." The support felt good, but I knew Patricia wouldn't make this easy. She'd already sent out a neighborhood-wide email painting me as a vexatious litigant who was attacking our community. The email was so inflammatory that Tom said it could be used as evidence of harassment. Meanwhile, my basement remained a construction zone. The ServPro team had pumped out all the water and set up industrial dehumidifiers that ran 24 hours a day with a sound like a jet engine. They'd removed all the damaged drywall, exposing the studs. The concrete floor had been treated with antimicrobial solutions. It looked like a disaster zone, and it was going to be weeks before it was livable again. Sarah and I were having dinner one night, eating takeout Chinese food at the kitchen table because our lives had become too chaotic for cooking. "I got another email from Patricia today," Sarah said quietly. "She's asking me to convince you to drop the lawsuit." "Are you kidding me?" "She said it would be better for everyone if we could resolve this amicably within the community." She keeps using air quotes in her emails. It's incredibly condescending. "What did you tell her?" "I told her to communicate with our lawyer and to stop contacting us directly." Sarah set down her chopsticks. "Franklin, I support you completely. What they did was wrong and they need to pay for it. But I'm worried about retaliation. She has a lot of influence in this neighborhood. Let her try. Every time she does something stupid, it just helps our case." The next development came 3 weeks later. I got home from work to find a citation notice taped to my front door. According to the HOA, I was in violation of community standards because my lawn had excessive dandelions and my mailbox needed repainting. The violations carried a $500 fine. I took photos of my lawn, which had maybe 3 dandelions, and my mailbox, which I'd painted less than a year ago. Then I walked down the street photographing other properties. Jerry's lawn had more dandelions than mine. Carol Zhang, who was on the HOA board, had a mailbox that was genuinely rusted. Patricia's own property had overgrown bushes that clearly violated the landscaping standards she was citing against me. I sent everything to Tom. "They're retaliating." "Perfect. This actually helps us. It shows a pattern of harassment. I'll file a motion to add this to the evidence." The preliminary hearing was set for June 12th. Tom prepared me extensively for what to expect. This wasn't the actual trial, just a hearing where the judge would review the basic facts and decide if there was enough merit to proceed. We also had our motion for a temporary restraining order requiring the HOA to fix the drainage issue. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Judge Margaret Foster presided, a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and an expression that suggested she didn't tolerate nonsense. Patricia was there with the other board members and their lawyer, Richard Beaumont, who wore an expensive suit and an expression of practiced boredom. Tom presented our case efficiently. He showed the photos of the flooding, presented Dr. Walsh's engineering report, showed the email chains where I'd warned the HOA, and presented the HOA's dismissive responses. He finished with the intimidation letter sent to neighbors and my violation citation as evidence of retaliation. Beaumont stood up and argued that the HOA had acted in good faith to improve the common areas, that they'd hired contractors who assured them the work was up to code, and that there was no definitive proof that the retaining wall caused the flooding. He claimed I could have pre-existing drainage issues. Judge Foster looked unimpressed. "Mr. Beaumont, I'm looking at an engineering report that very clearly identifies the retaining wall as the cause of the flooding. I'm looking at contemporaneous warnings from the plaintiff, who is himself a civil engineer. And I'm looking at what appears to be retaliatory citations issued after the lawsuit was filed. Does your client dispute any of these facts?" "Your Honor, the HOA disputes the interpretation of those facts." "That's not what I asked." She flipped through the documents. "Did your client build the retaining wall in question?" "Yes, but did the plaintiff warn them in writing about potential drainage issues?" He expressed concerns, but did the flooding occur after the wall was built in the manner the plaintiff predicted? Beaumont hesitated. "The timing is coincidental." "Coincidental," Judge Foster repeated flatly. She looked at the engineering report again. "I'm granting the plaintiff's motion for a temporary restraining order. The HOA is ordered to remediate the drainage issues within 60 days by installing proper drainage systems behind the retaining wall or removing the wall entirely. The HOA is also ordered to cease any retaliatory actions against the plaintiff. This case has sufficient merit to proceed to trial. Trial date is set for September 15th. Patricia's face went purple. She leaned over and started whispering furiously to Beaumont, who tried to calm her down. As we left the courtroom, I felt vindicated. Tom clapped me on the shoulder. "That went very well. The judge clearly sees through their nonsense. Do you think they'll actually fix the drainage? They have to. If they don't, they'll be in contempt of court. That comes with serious penalties." But I underestimated Patricia's stubbornness. 2 weeks went by with no action from the HOA. I sent a formal letter reminding them of the court order. They responded through Beaumont, saying they were evaluating options and obtaining bids from contractors. More rain came. My basement flooded again, though not as badly because ServPro had installed temporary pumps. Still, it was another $3,000 in remediation costs and more damage to account for. I documented everything and sent it to Tom to add to our lawsuit. "They're digging themselves deeper," Tom said. "Every day they don't comply with the court order. Every additional instance of flooding, it all adds up. We can pursue contempt charges if they don't act soon." July arrived. The deadline for fixing the drainage was August 10th, and there was still no movement from the HOA. I'd heard through the neighborhood grapevine that they were having heated board meetings where Patricia insisted they should appeal the judge's order rather than comply. Donald Murray and Carol Zhang were apparently arguing with her, saying they needed to just fix it, but Patricia was convinced she could win. Then, something interesting happened. I got a knock on my door one evening from Donald Murray. He was a retired accountant, probably in his late 60s, and he looked stressed. "Franklin, can I talk to you privately?" I led him into my living room. He sat down heavily on the couch and rubbed his face. "I'm resigning from the HOA board. I've had enough of Patricia's nonsense, but before I go, I wanted you to know what's really going on." "I'm listening." "Patricia never got proper permits for that retaining wall. She pushed it through using emergency authority, claiming there was erosion that needed immediate attention. But there wasn't any real erosion. She just wanted it built because she thought it looked nice. She found the cheapest contractor she could find, some guy who did the work in 3 days without any inspection." My jaw dropped. She built it without permits? Without permits, without engineering oversight, without board approval beyond her own authority. Carol and I didn't know until after it was done. When we found out, we wanted to report it, but Patricia convinced us it would expose the HOA to liability. Now I realize she was just covering her own negligence. "Donald, would you be willing to testify to this?" He nodded slowly. "That's why I'm here. I'll testify. But I'm also telling you something else. Patricia has been using HOA funds to pay Beaumont's legal fees. She spent over $40,000 of the association's money fighting your lawsuit instead of just fixing the drainage. Homeowners don't know this yet because she's been hiding it in the accounting. When they find out, there's going to be hell to pay." This was bigger than I thought. "Do you have proof of the spending?" "I have copies of all the financial records. I made them before I resigned. I'm giving them to you, and I'm also filing a complaint with the state about financial mismanagement." He pulled out a thumb drive from his pocket. "Everything's on here." After Donald left, I immediately called Tom and sent him the files. He called me back an hour later, and I could hear the excitement in his voice. "Franklin, this is explosive. She didn't just build the wall without permits. She's been embezzling HOA funds to cover up her mistakes. This isn't just a civil case anymore. This could be criminal." "What do we do?" "We file an amended complaint adding fraud and misappropriation of funds. We also notify the state HOA regulatory board and possibly the district attorney. This just became a much bigger case." The next board meeting was scheduled for July 28th, and I decided to attend. Sarah came with me for moral support. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a small building with a large meeting room that could hold about 50 people. Usually these meetings had maybe 10 attendees. Tonight there were at least 40. Word had spread about the lawsuit, the court order, and Donald's resignation. People were angry. Patricia sat at the front table with Carol Zhang and Richard Beaumont. She looked nervous but was clearly trying to project authority. She called the meeting to order and tried to rush through the agenda, but Jerry Rodriguez stood up. "I have questions about the lawsuit with Franklin Lancaster. Why hasn't the HOA complied with the judge's order to fix the drainage?" Patricia's lips thinned. "We are evaluating our options and may appeal the order. The judge didn't have all the facts." "The facts are that Franklin's basement flooded because of our retaining wall," Jerry said. "I was at the meeting when he warned us this would happen. Why didn't we listen?" "The retaining wall is not the cause of his flooding. He has pre-existing drainage issues." I stood up. "That's a lie, Patricia. I have an engineering report that conclusively proves the wall caused the flooding. I also have documentation that you built the wall without proper permits." The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Patricia's face went red. "That's privileged information. You have no right. Donald Murray gave me the information before he resigned. He also gave me the financial records showing you've spent over $40,000 of HOA funds on legal fees fighting this lawsuit instead of just fixing the problem. Money that's coming out of everyone's dues. Now people were shouting. Carol Zhang stood up, her face pale. Patricia, is this true? Patricia looked trapped. Beaumont leaned over and whispered to her, probably telling her not to answer. But the damage was done. Linda Kowalski stood up. I move for an emergency vote to remove Patricia Hendricks as HOA president for gross negligence and financial mismanagement. Second, said at least 3 people simultaneously. Patricia tried to gavel the meeting back to order, but Carol Zhang took over. We need to vote on this. All in favor of removing Patricia Hendricks as president? Almost every hand went up. Patricia's face went through several colors before settling on a sickly white. This is illegal. You can't remove me without proper notice. Actually, the bylaws allow for emergency removal with a 2/3 vote in cases of gross negligence or malfeasance, Carol said, reading from a binder. The vote is overwhelming. You're removed, effective immediately. Please turn over all HOA property and records. Patricia looked like she wanted to argue, but Beaumont put a hand on her arm and shook his head. They left together, Patricia muttering about lawsuits and revenge. Carol Zhang took over as interim president and immediately addressed the room. First order of business, we need to comply with the judge's order and fix the drainage. Second, we need to get proper permits retroactively or remove the retaining wall. Third, we need to settle Franklin's lawsuit fairly. We've wasted enough money and goodwill fighting something we were wrong about from the start. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Maybe this could actually be resolved. Over the next 2 weeks, the new board worked quickly. They hired a legitimate engineering firm to design a proper drainage system. They applied for the necessary permits. They reached out to Tom to discuss settlement. The settlement negotiations happened in early August. Carol Zhang, representing the HOA, sat down with Tom and me in his office conference room. She looked exhausted. Franklin, on behalf of the HOA, I want to apologize. Patricia's actions were inexcusable, and the board should have listened to your warnings. We're prepared to offer full compensation for all damages, including your legal fees. What about punitive damages? Tom asked. Carol hesitated. We'd like to avoid those if possible. The HOA is already in financial trouble because of Patricia's spending. Punitive damages could bankrupt us, which would hurt all the homeowners. I thought about my neighbors, people like Jerry and Linda who had supported me. I'm willing to waive punitive damages if you agree to the following. Pay all my damages and legal fees in full, complete the drainage remediation within 30 days, and remove Patricia's retaliatory citations from my record. Done, all of it. We shook hands. The settlement came to $71,000, including my additional damages from the second flooding, plus $28,000 in legal fees. The HOA agreed to pay in 2 installments, one immediately and one after the drainage work was complete. But the story wasn't over yet. While the civil case was settling, the criminal investigation was heating up. Donald's complaint to the state HOA regulatory board triggered an audit. The auditors discovered that Patricia had not only spent HOA funds on legal fees without authorization, she'd also paid herself consulting fees totaling $15,000 for extra work that was never approved by the board. The district attorney's office opened an investigation for embezzlement and fraud. On September 3rd, I was having my morning coffee when I saw 3 police cars pull up to Patricia's house. I watched from my kitchen window as 2 detectives walked to her door. She came out still in her bathrobe, and they spoke for a few minutes before she went back inside. She emerged 20 minutes later, dressed, and was escorted to one of the police cars. Patricia Hendricks was arrested on 3 counts of embezzlement and 2 counts of fraud. The news spread through the neighborhood within hours. Jerry texted me, "Did you see Patricia get arrested? Karma is real." The criminal case moved slowly, as they always do. But the evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, email correspondence, board meeting minutes that Patricia had falsified, all of it painted a picture of someone who treated the HOA as her personal fiefdom. Her lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the DA's office was not inclined to be generous with someone who'd stolen from her own neighbors. Meanwhile, the drainage work was completed in late September. The engineering firm installed a proper drainage system with weep holes, gravel backfill, and perforated pipes that directed water away from the houses. They also regraded the common area so water naturally flowed toward the street drainage rather than toward properties. It was what should have been done from the beginning. My basement was finally restored by early October. New drywall, new flooring, new electrical work, fresh paint. The insurance had covered some of it, but the HOA settlement made me whole. I stood in my renovated office, everything clean and dry and functional, and felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Not just because I'd won, but because I'd stood up for what was right and refused to back down. The final chapter came in December. Patricia Hendricks pleaded guilty to 2 counts of embezzlement as part of a plea agreement. She was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison, ordered to pay restitution of $55,000 to the HOA, and given 3 years of probation after her release. She'd also lost her house, as her legal fees and restitution bankrupted her. The judge's statement at sentencing was scathing, describing her actions as a betrayal of trust and a stunning example of hubris over common sense. On Christmas Eve, Sarah and I hosted a neighborhood party. We invited everyone who'd supported us through the ordeal. Jerry came with his wife. Linda brought wine. Robert brought his famous barbecue. Even Carol Zhang stopped by, no longer stressed but actually smiling. "I still can't believe how crazy it all got," Jerry said, standing in my fully restored basement that now served as a comfortable entertainment space. "But you never backed down." "I'm an engineer," I said. "I follow the evidence and the logic. Patricia's wall was going to cause flooding. It did cause flooding. She refused to accept responsibility. Everything that happened after was just the natural consequence of her choices." Linda raised her glass. "To Franklin, for standing up to HOA tyranny." Everyone laughed and drank to that. We ate and talked and celebrated making it through a difficult year. Around 10 p.m., people started heading home. Sarah and I cleaned up together, working in comfortable silence. "Are you glad we stayed?" she asked. "We could have moved after all this." I looked around our house, thought about our neighbors who'd become genuine friends through adversity, and shook my head. This is our home. We weren't going to let one person's negligence drive us away. Besides, the new board is actually competent. Carol told me they're implementing new rules. No major construction without engineering oversight. All spending over $5,000 requires a membership vote, and term limits for board positions. Good. That's how it should have been all along. We finished cleaning and went upstairs. I checked my email one last time before bed and saw a message from Tom Chen. The HOA had made their final payment. Everything was settled. I closed my laptop and turned off the light. It had been 9 months since I woke up to find my basement flooded. 9 months of stress, legal battles, neighborhood drama, and uncertainty. But in the end, justice had prevailed. Patricia was in prison. The drainage was fixed. I was fully compensated. And the HOA had new leadership that actually listened to reason. Sometimes the system works, I thought, as I drifted off to sleep. You just have to be willing to fight for it. The new year brought a fresh start for everyone in Maple Ridge. Carol Zhang was elected as the permanent HOA president in January, running unopposed. Her first act was to commission a full engineering survey of all common areas to identify any other potential issues before they became problems. It cost the HOA money, but it was money well spent. The retaining wall, now properly equipped with drainage, stood as a monument not to Patricia's vision, but to the importance of listening to expertise. Every time I looked at it, I remembered the chaos it had caused and felt grateful for the resolution. Jerry Rodriguez did end up joining a class action with 2 other homeowners who'd also experienced drainage issues from the wall. The new HOA board settled with them quickly and fairly, paying for landscaping repairs and soil remediation. Carol's approach of transparency and fairness was healing the community in ways that Patricia's authoritarian style never could have. I ran into Patricia's lawyer, Richard Beaumont, at a coffee shop in March. He was getting a latte and I was picking up breakfast sandwiches for Sarah and me. He saw me and hesitated, then came over. "Lancaster, I want you to know, I advised Patricia multiple times to settle your case. She wouldn't listen. She was convinced she was right and everyone else was wrong." "I know," I said. "I'm not angry at you. You were just doing your job." He nodded, looking relieved. "For what it's worth, In 20 years of practice, I've never seen someone so determined to self-destruct. She could have fixed everything for $20,000 back in April. Instead, she spent $55,000 fighting it, went to prison, and lost everything. Pride is expensive. That it is. He picked up his coffee. Take care, Lancaster. By summer, life had returned to normal. My basement stayed dry through spring storms and even a particularly intense thunderstorm in June that dropped 3 inches of rain in 2 hours. The drainage system worked perfectly, directing water away from foundations as it should have from the beginning. I still thought about the whole ordeal sometimes, usually when I was working in my basement office or when HOA emails came through. But instead of anger, I felt a quiet satisfaction. I'd identified a problem, warned people about it, been ignored, suffered damages, and then fought back until justice was served. It was exhausting and stressful, but it was also proof that individuals could stand up to institutions and win when they were in the right. Sarah and I celebrated our 10th wedding anniversary that August with a trip to Charleston. We walked along the waterfront, ate at expensive restaurants, and didn't talk about HOAs or flooded basements once. It was blissful. When we got back, there was a letter waiting from the HOA. For a brief moment, I felt my blood pressure spike, old reflexes kicking in. But it was just a newsletter from Carol, updating everyone on community improvements. New playground equipment, refreshed paint on the clubhouse, and a neighborhood barbecue planned for Labor Day. Things I never would have gotten from Patricia, I thought. Sometimes the worst situations led to better outcomes. The neighborhood barbecue was a huge success. Over 100 people showed up, families with kids running around, people playing cornhole and volleyball. Carol gave a short speech thanking everyone for their patience during the difficult transition and promising continued transparency and community involvement. I was manning the grill, flipping burgers, when Linda came over with her husband Mark. "Franklin, I never properly thanked you," she said. "Watching you stand up to Patricia gave me courage to push for changes in my own life. I finally confronted my boss about being passed over for promotions, and I got a raise and a new position." "That's great, Linda, but you did that yourself." "Yeah, but you showed me it was possible to fight back against unfair treatment and win." That mattered. After they walked away, Jerry sidled up next to me. "You're a folk hero now, you know. The guy who took down the evil HOA president." "I didn't take her down. She took herself down. I just refused to be a victim of her negligence." "Potato, potato. Either way, no one's going to mess with you now." I laughed and handed him a burger. "Good. All I wanted was a dry basement and fair treatment. Is that really too much to ask?" Apparently it was for Patricia. The sun was setting, casting golden light across the common areas. Kids were catching fireflies. Adults were laughing and talking. The retaining wall, properly built now, held back the earth as it should. Everything was as it should be. I thought about the journey from that terrible morning in April when I'd found my basement flooded to this peaceful evening in September. It had been a long road, filled with stress and confrontation and legal battles, but I'd never questioned whether I was doing the right thing. The evidence was clear, the logic was sound, and the law was on my side. Patricia Hendricks had learned an expensive lesson about the consequences of ignoring expertise and refusing to admit mistakes. The neighborhood had learned the importance of holding leaders accountable. And I had learned that standing up for yourself, even when it's difficult and scary, is always worth it. As the party wound down and we cleaned up, Carol came over to help collect trash. "Franklin, I wanted to tell you something. The board is creating an advisory committee of homeowners with relevant expertise to review any major projects before they're approved. We want you to chair it." "Me? After everything that happened?" "Because of everything that happened. You tried to help us avoid a disaster and we didn't listen. We're not making that mistake again. Will you do it?" I thought about it for a moment. It would be extra work, more time spent on HOA business, but it would also ensure that what happened with the retaining wall could never happen again. On one condition, the committee has real authority to stop projects that are poorly designed or risky. No more rubber stamping bad ideas. Done. That's exactly what we want. We shook hands, and I felt the last piece of the puzzle click into place. The nightmare of the flooded basement had led to positive change. Patricia was gone. replaced by leadership that valued expertise and transparency. The community was stronger. My property was restored. Justice had been served. That night, lying in bed, Sarah asked me if I had any regrets about how I'd handled everything. "Only one," I said. "I wish I'd taken video of Patricia's face when the judge granted our motion. That would have been satisfying to watch again." Sarah laughed and hit me with a pillow. "You're terrible." "Maybe, but I'm terrible with a dry basement." We fell asleep, smiling, the sound of cicadas coming through the open window. Outside, the retaining wall stood in the darkness, properly engineered, properly built, properly maintained. A reminder that sometimes you have to tear down what's broken and start over, whether that's a wall or a toxic leadership structure. The years that followed were peaceful. I served on the advisory committee and helped prevent several poorly conceived projects, including someone's proposal to install decorative boulders without considering the weight loads on underground utilities. Carol Jung remained president for 3 years before retiring and passing the role to Linda Kowalski, who ran on a platform of continued transparency and community engagement. I occasionally thought about Patricia serving time in federal prison for her crimes. I didn't take pleasure in her suffering, but I didn't regret my role in her downfall either. She'd had every opportunity to do the right thing at every step of the process. She chose pride and stubbornness instead. Those were her choices, not mine. My basement remained dry through every storm season. The drainage system continued to function perfectly, and every time it rained, I went downstairs to check, saw no water, no moisture, nothing but a clean, dry, functional space, and felt grateful for the battle I'd fought and won. Because in the end, it wasn't really about the money or even the house. It was about the principle that people in positions of authority have a responsibility to listen to expertise, to admit when they're wrong, and to fix their mistakes. Patricia Hendricks refused to do any of those things, and she paid the price. I just made sure she paid mine too.